What's going on, guys, and welcome to episode 28. I am your host, Marcus, and in this episode, we are talking about igniting change with Chris Bircher. Now, Chris is someone that reached out to me to do an interview on his podcast, essentially discussing curiosity and how curiosity has led me to where I am today. In turn, I believe that podcast would extremely well and something you can find on his website at chrisbircher.com. And go over that particular interview on curiosity. I believe it went extremely well. And in turn, I wanted to bring him on to essentially talk about the changes he is trying to ignite into his life. I think it's extremely important to have people like Chris on this podcast, especially to help people discover what they essentially want in their life and ignite that change. And he is doing that. Even at a young age, he essentially talks about, how he had that idea, that curiosity to break off to do something more than just the 9 to 5. And that is what he is going to try to ignite into his life. And in this interview, you'll see what his struggles are. You'll see what he is trying to overcome to essentially ignite this change in his life, and something that he is had a passion for, something that he's always wanted to do. And so it comes through in this interview. Now, being said, I don't want to make this intro any longer than it needs to be. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this interview started with Chris Bircher. Well, all right. So Chris, how are you doing today?
How are we doing? Complain. I'm good. Yeah, it's what is it? Thursday? Yeah, nothing.
It's been long.
Yeah, same old. It's nice. It went from 70s to 90s like it does every spring. It's like we're losing spring and autumn here every year. It just goes straight from winter to summer and then from summer to winter.
Yeah, Virginia has got some odd weather lately.
Yeah, I miss. It's so funny, and I figured we might talk about this a little bit today. It's like I always get stuck with, am I just getting older, and and not remembering stuff, right? Or are things changing, right? So I remember 3-foot snows and like long springs and long falls, but maybe that never happened.
Yeah, it's always been like this. It's kind of like back when you're a kid, right? Like everything was just. Was bigger. I remember we used to live in this big circle. And then I remember going back there as an adult in New Mexico, and that circle that seemed so big, right? We used to ride our bike around this circle, and then you go back and it's like a hop, skip, and a jump away, right? It's not even that bad.
Right. And how do you know? Like, how do you know? Some things I guess you just never know. Like when I was a kid, I remember all I did, I had a bike, right? The bike was the ticket to whatever I wanted to do. If I wanted to play baseball, I had to bike myself to practice. If I wanted to whatever, that's what I did. And I've gone back on Google Maps and sort of seen when I was like 8 years old, I was riding my bike like 10 miles away from my house.
Oh yeah.
So there's one that's kind of backwards, right? If we remembered everything small, I would have been like at the end of the street, but I actually was a long way. That's just so funny. Memory is only so good, I guess.
Yeah, most definitely. So can you tell us a bit about yourself, Chris? Now, I know a little bit about you going through your feeds, your social media feeds and stuff, but can you give us like a high-level view of your background?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a funny question, right? Like, who are you? And then a lot of times we just say, like, what do you do, right? But so I was an oddball kid, went to college, but I was pretty smart, I guess. My parents sort of sold me on the American dream. I was going to go to college, and I didn't really want to go to college, but I went to college, and I almost failed out. Took a break, worked, and then I decided I got to finish this. My dad put some money into paying for school, so I went back and I changed my major from philosophy to fisheries management, which meant I'd be working in the woods, presumably, and streams and stuff, which sounded pretty cool. And did pretty good the second half of undergrad. And I thought, well, let's keep going. Where does this lead? And was encouraged to go to grad school, went to grad school, got a master's. That went pretty well. I knew people, leveraged it into a PhD, which was all paid for, right? So it's like for what I paid for my undergrad, I ended up, part of my decision was it's free. might as well go.
Yeah.
And really, that's my dad's voice. My dad's like, dude, it's $100,000 value. How are you going to walk away from that? What else are you going to do?
Yeah.
And anyway, so I got a PhD in aquatic ecology, which, you know, that in a quarter will get you a hot cup of Jack Squat. Because, yeah, it's like basket weaving as far as jobs go. But I got a job and I was on the tenure track. And at the time, my wife, who was a pharmacist, who made like twice as much money as I did as a college professor, believe it or not, and we had 3 kids, and my kids were always sick, so I had them in daycare, which cost my salary, but they were so one of them was always sick, and I was just like, this is stupid. I'm not going to be able to build a career if I always have to stay home with the kids, because, you know, my wife wasn't going to stay home with the kids because she made more money than me, right? Yeah. So I just kind of defaulted to the primary. Anyway, so I just decided I'm just going to quit. I'll just be a stay-at-home dad. This is the model, you know, because you have kids, and I didn't have any preconceived notions about. We didn't ever sit down and said, okay, you'll do this. And I mean, who does that, right? Who sits down and discusses these things before you get married or before whatever? Anyway, so that worked out until it didn't. My wife fell in love with somebody else. And so that whole model that I'd quit my job and she'd take care of me, that went to shit. Right. So then I had to go back to work, and you know, you don't jump off the tenure track and just get back on it. You know, I was blacklisted by that field. And so I did some independent contractor work and got a job at like a state agency, government agency, the Department of Environmental Quality. They're, you know, near you too. And did that for a while, and then got remarried, had a 4th daughter, and decided, you know, another sugar mama. She's a doctor. I guess I have a type. And the whole primary caregiver thing, just, I mean, I can't get away from it. And so I mostly, you know, like right now, my youngest is in daycare. My older ones are all old enough to take care of themselves. And now I'm trying to figure out a way to generate passive income so that she can quit her MD job and we can try living a life where we're not slaves to the rat race. I guess that's like a summary.
Very nice.
You know, yeah.
So what, if you go back to your college, when you were talking about when you know, early parts of college or beginning of college, when you were thinking about not going for your degree, was there something else that was kind of keeping your interest or trying to pull your interest away at that time that you wanted to possibly go explore more of?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I feel like I'm back there now. Like all of a sudden I'm 18 again. But now, you know, it wasn't that I had this urge to do something else. I just didn't like the plan that I had been sold. Mm-hmm. Right. I feel like, and I understand this now, I didn't really then, but I feel like I was unable to buy into my parents' dream. You know, I looked at this plan that they had for me, which was, if you go to college, you'll get a good job. If you get a good job, you'll have good money. If you had good money, you'll buy the right house. If you buy the right house, you'll meet the right spouse. If you have the right spouse, you'll have the da-da-da-da-da. And there was this linear plan, and it was all contingent upon me going the next step, go to college. And that was going to it was all going to fall in. And I just didn't understand that, or I rebelled against that. You know, I wanted to gaze at my navel. You know, I wanted to smoke weed and have cool thoughts, and like, I don't know what, I don't know where, then see where that led me, you know, and just trusting that I'd be able to take care of myself. Because, you know, at that point I'd had a job since I was 13. I understood that. So I wasn't really pulled to do something else. I just wasn't compelled to. And what a stupid investment. It's like, even though it was different then, nowadays it's like, let's put $20,000 a year into this kid who doesn't want to do this thing. Exactly. Who's going to invest in that? Even like my daughter, she's 19 and in school, and, you know, it's working out, but I see a lot of me and her, and it's sort of like, what else could she have done with this money? You know, maybe she could have, anyway. But now I'm compelled to try to figure out, I'd go back and like figure out whatever that would have led to, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe I can try that again at almost, you know, at 30 years later. To see if I can make the world work for me instead of work for the world. I don't know. But when, that's what kind of what I was really attracted to you about is like, here's this guy that seems to be kind of, if not doing that himself, or doing that himself and sort of encouraging other people to do it. And is sort of outside that, the program, the model, the what I call the old American dream. Just want something different.
Yeah, most definitely. I know even my folks were that way. I know my father was big into trying to getting me into the government and stuff. So I kind of went that way. I went military, but it's just kind of trying to. It never felt right. Like you get that advice, right? They always say, you should go with advice, and a lot of times you just go against it and do whatever. But and I've always found that's worked for me, right? And so that's what I've done. And
yeah.
But now let's talk about you wanting to ignite the change in your life, right? Like you talked about it, you've had like essentially like periods in your life where you wanted to branch off. Now, how did you go about determining like what kind of change you wanted to make in your life? I know you just talked about essentially being able to break away and freedom to essentially do whatever you want under your own terms.
Yeah.
Like, how did you go about that? Like finding your purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that's exactly the kind of thing I want to know from you. You know what I mean? Like, how does a person have this thing that's, or let's take my wife, and like, not that she's not here, she can't defend herself, but still, she's really frustrated with the medical field, and she needs to ignite a change in her life, like big time. Like she's depressed and she can't spend enough time with her family, and she's sort of what I would argue is a slave to this grind. And from the outside, you'd think she has the best job in the world. She's rich or whatever people think about doctors. But from my perspective, I'm like, this is dumb. But anyway, so it's funny that you say like the my way thing, because I feel like the more I listen to myself, whatever you want to call that, like my heart or my soul, or like, what, like Don Miguel Ruiz, the Four Agreements, they would call silent knowledge. Like this feeling that the more I do that, the more that I'm able to sort of ignite my passion and follow. But the problem is that's all noisy because it's clouded by these other voices from my parents or society or friends or whoever that say, no, you've got to work a job you hate, and that's how you get along. So like when I was in undergrad, I thought, well, I better do something. I wanted to be a philosopher. And so I thought, and I didn't even know what that meant. I just knew that was the most interesting thing I wanted to do. And I followed that. And then I changed my mind because of my dad and said, well, I got to get a job that's going to make me money. Being a philosopher is not going to make you money. That's not the point of school. And so I said, all right, I'll listen to you and I'll change. And at the time I said, well, I don't want to work. And I don't want to be an academic, right? That's the only job you can get with philosophy, and I don't do that. So I changed my mind, followed somebody else's dream, and what ended up happening? I became an academic anyway, right? Just in a field that I really wasn't as passionate about. And I excelled in that field. I was on the track to become, good at that job, or whatever that means. But I think if I look back and would have followed my heart, and ended up at the same place with, say, a PhD in philosophy and an academic philosophy position, that would have been a much better fit. Right. So, the question is, what was I doing when I decided I wanted to explore philosophy? What were the conditions? What was what lit that passion? I wish I knew, but I had moments where if I listened to myself, if I could quiet the noise from the world trying to talk me into something else, that's when I was closest to what you're getting at, and could make the decisions. And like deciding to quit my job, I didn't listen to the world. The world would have said, you can't do that.
What are you doing?
You don't quit your job to stay home with your kids. And like, that's a whole lot of levels, right? Most of the men in my life would have been like, you're an idiot. Most of the men don't want that role. And it's not the way tradition, the whole thing. It was just, but for some reason, I didn't hear that. I didn't even entertain the thought of seeking advice from the world. I just did it. And so whatever that is, whatever that just do it thing gets at what I think you're talking about. I mean, how do you do it? Do you have a script for igniting change in your life?
It's much the same, right? Like it's that intuition, and even for myself, right? It's always been, I've been along the ways, the same ways you're talking about, the same kind of infrastructure, right? My father very much wanted me to follow, go 9 to 5, do all these different things. And I was always against that, like you said, and looking. And so I've always found that you have to go off intuition, right? Like when you look at changes, right? Yeah, everybody's going to be against, especially like when you're talking about like what we're talking about and going against, being that black sheep and going against the herd, right? Like people don't really, they see that as a bad thing. And that, you're throwing your life away, especially when you start getting around our age, right? Like they're like, what are you doing? Right? Like you got kids and whatever the case is, but it's like, I think for me, like, I think you need that adjustment. Like I've had a lot of different deaths in my family as of recently and stuff like that. And so that really puts things in perspective, right? Like your time is limited, and looking at that, and I know we've heard that a lot. And for me, it's always been, well, I'm happy when I can control what I'm doing, and I excel better, right, at whatever I am doing when it's something that I do enjoy. When I lose track of time, when I'm excited to get up in the morning and start doing it, right, and like that passion you get when you were a kid waking up at Christmas, mm-hmm. right? You're like, oh, I got to go downstairs and see what's going on, right? That whole thing, right? And so when you look at that, you try to apply that to your life. Like, are you that passionate about getting up and going to do it? All right, you lose track of time, and I find a lot of times I stay up late during the night, right, and I lose track of time. Like, oh, I need to go to bed and stuff like that, and wake up early and excited about it and everything like that. So it's essentially where I find it, and trying to follow that. And yes, you do have that roommate in your head, right? That's like, oh, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's flow. I mean, and so that's funny because I always say or think in my head, like, that's how I want to live. Mm-hmm. That whole scenario you described of waking up in the morning and being curious and motivated to do something that day and to get into that zone where time goes away. Like, isn't that how everybody wants to live? Like, to me, that's, and then what I hear is people saying, no, you can't do that. You can't, that, that doesn't work. That's, like self-indulgent. It's there's so many reasons I can come up with in my head of why that isn't a thing. And where I'm at in my life now, like in the last 6 months or so, I've sort of tried to ignite change, in my life, and by doing small things, and they're starting to accumulate. And so I'm more able now to be like, who said that? Why do I think that I can't do this? Why do I think I can't like sit at home and write all day because I think that's going to lead to something meaningful, or because it's going to make me feel good. Why can I not do that? And to question those things. But man, it's hard to shake. And one thing I'll say, like, I know you feel the same way about your dad. They didn't mean anything bad, right? I mean, it's just the way, I always think about it like World War II was pretty bad, and we didn't have that. You talk about trauma and experiencing that thing to shift your perspective. I figure our grandparents must have been pretty shaken up by that. And so their dream of how to live your life came out of that perspective. And, a couple generations later, we come along and we learn the same thing, but maybe it doesn't apply to us anymore because we didn't come out of a world war or live through a depression. So I respect that. And I'm not mad. I know a lot of people get angry, at the oppression of society or whatever. But I'm trying to come at it fresh and just sort of say, what do I want to do? And what can I do? And at the end, I always get hung up on the money thing. You got to earn money, even though I don't. That really, my wife makes money. I could be the ultimate housewife, and not work and take care of the kids and cook and clean, the traditional. And but I don't know why I feel like I still have to justify my life with money. That's the hardest one. That's the hardest one to let go of.
I think even for like from a men's perspective, right? Like I think we just have that natural desire to want to provide, I think, right? I think, and that's
Yeah.
essentially judged by money, right? Sadly, I think in the society that we live in today.
I was just thinking about this, like, you and I, when you were on my podcast, talked about curiosity, and I was thinking about this and reflecting on those interviews, that what you just said about getting up in the morning, like on Christmas, you're motivated by excitement and passion, right? And that's what curiosity does, is a good motivator. But yeah, today the only real motivator is money, because we're starting to just measure all the success. It's all measured by money. And now it's to the point where it's like come full circle. And when you get up out of bed in the morning, you're motivated by wanting to make more money so you can buy the better car and impress your friends or get the girl. I don't even know. Because I've always had an unhealthy relationship with money. And this is another thing I've discovered. I sort of came up saying, I don't deserve it. It's not for me. I'm never going to have it. And so I'm just going to get used to not having any. It's like when I ran a business, I didn't really worry about the profits, the revenue side. I just worried about doing everything super cheap. And that was my whole business strategy, is if I spent less money than everybody, there'll be money left over.
Yeah.
And that's how I did it. I mean, isn't that funny? And it worked. But that whole relationship with money, it's like I'm rebelling against that, just like I did when I was a kid. But you have to. I think people have to change. I'm speaking for myself. Our relationship with money to be more, not like me and just say I don't need it, because that's not true. And then not like super gluttonous people that need billions and billions of dollars, to sleep well at night and feel safe, but somewhere in the middle. To have a healthier and more accurate, I don't know. And I don't even know what that is. I'm just trying to figure out. Another thing I'm trying to ignite in myself is a understanding of what money really is and what's a healthy way to look at it.
Yeah, I've always found that, you go after all those things and you chase the house and the car and all those things, and you have those things, and right, they kind of lose its pizzazz, right? The flair and everything for it. Once you obtain those things, and the thing, I think you can get to a point, and I think this is something that a lot of people like fight with, right? Because again, it goes back to the society and everything. Like that's essentially what you need to do, is you need to get these things and line up, and so that's what everybody's taught. But when you start looking at it, right, once you obtain those things and you lose those things, right, you're kind of like, well, I feel happier when I just don't have those things. When I look internal, right, and start like living just for myself and being like the minimalist, having like the minimalist mindset, right, and being okay with yourself and okay with less, and being able to go out and nature bathe whenever you want, right, and do all these different things, and that's where you really feel most alive, right, not chained to a desk or having to do something that you don't want to do.
Dude, I mean, it's so funny. What I'm realizing is that all these simple truths, like you just said, like the connection to nature bathing, that's awesome. You hear that all the time. And you mentioned something a while ago that was along these same lines. We hear these things all the time, and we just sort of go, yeah. Meditate. That's right. Okay, I'm gonna meditate, and everything's gonna be fine. Go out in nature. Yeah, it's gonna help me. But what I'm learning in the last 6 months of doing it, I've just said, you know what? I'm going to stop being cynical about this. I'm going to stop rolling my eyes, at the mention of these things, and I'm going to try it. What's wrong with that? Maybe the world is right, and I'm the idiot. And what I'm finding out is, there's truth to this stuff, and these simple things that, I mean, they're not easy, right? Like meditation is hard, but I've built sort of a meditation habit, I guess. Nothing, I'd say probably 4 to 5 days a week for 10 to 20 minutes. Somebody might look at that and say, oh, you're not a meditate, whatever. That's what I ended up being able to do that fit into my life. And it has totally changed many elements of how I look at the world. Now it hasn't turned me into, I can't fly. It didn't, a new Corvette didn't show up in my driveway. It didn't drastically alter reality, but it's made it. And so now I'm like, well, what else do people say that I used to laugh at, or that I blew off, or that I never really took the time to understand
Mhm.
what people are saying when they say like something like nature bathe. And my wife did it the other night. She went out to put the chickens up, and she was gone for a few minutes, and I'm like, uh-oh, maybe a chicken died, or you never know, with
Yeah.
the farm. And she comes back in, she's like, oh, the moon was just so beautiful, and I had to take a minute and just appreciate it, and I'm like, yeah. And I could sense the difference in her. And it was the right thing to do. It was a good thing to do. And for her being so caught up in her work situation and being unhappy, and it was really good for me to see her do that and for her to do that. But anyway, I mean, I think the problem is so much simpler than we understand, but simple isn't easy. I guess that's my point.
Yeah.
Simple is hard.
Yeah, I think, well, that's it too, right? I think what it is, you have, again, going back to society and what we've been conditioned to believe, that in the complexity we like to always introduce into stuff, and realize that.
Yeah, do you know about that?
Yeah. And that's it, right? It's just doing it. And again, it goes back to, people will judge you, right? Like I've lost friends of people that because of the actions I've taken, right, and doing stuff like meditation stuff, people see that as like, well, that's just too far out of,
Yeah, it doesn't
what
doesn't
I do, right? That's not realistic, right? I can't just stop and meditate. That's just not going to happen. And yeah, I've been there, right? Like it was hard to just sit down for 2 minutes, but like you said, like you have that compounding effect, and you really see the dramatic difference it has. And how different you become. Like you become more mellow, or you're not so
right.
high strung, right, on every little thing that happens in the world, which is nice to have.
Oh man, huge. Well, and it helps you. And this is the thing that gets me, is it's benefiting me. And this is just one example, right? Meditation. There's so many other things: exercise, diet, sleep. And unfortunately, I've implemented a lot of these things, so I can't go back and say this is a result of meditation. You know what I mean? I did a lot of changes, and I don't really know, but it's affected me in ways I haven't even really observed, which is what's starting to get me. Like I see a kind of a somatic healer coach through Zoom every couple of weeks, and he helps me completely shut off the analytical mind and sort of do intentional meditation, sort of guided meditations where I try to solve problems or whatever, but just listening to my body. And I keep telling him, it's like, I don't know what I've done, but here's how I can tell you that I've changed. It's like you said, I'm calmer when I have a spontaneous thought of, say, I'm going to make an offer on this apartment complex, and towards my goal of passive income, instead of automatically saying, oh, I'm never going to win it, I'm never going to be good enough, there's no way I can compete with all these sophisticated buyers, they're never going to take my offer, going down this rabbit hole of all the reasons this is going to suck. Now all of a sudden I can go, oh, wait, hey, don't do that. You know what I mean? It's just like the awareness that I'm getting ready to do something that's going to be detrimental to my day or week, just being able to say, hey, don't do that, and stop. That is huge, right? But most people would just think that's not even a thing. But it's those tiny little incremental results that I almost have to look for to see the changes. But those are going to add up, right? Over years. And that's how it works, I think. It must. That's my evidence of how it's working for me. So it's simple, but it's hard, and it's painfully slow, but only because you can't really see it. It's weird.
Well, yeah, that's it. I think you have to condition yourself, right? You have to uncondition yourself first, and then recondition yourself into where you become more, like you said, aware of the choices that you make. And that's where I think, you really start igniting change, because you're aware of actually what's going on, as opposed to just flying on autopilot and saying, okay, this is what I normally do, let's just go with this kind of thing. No, I'm trying to make a change here. I'm aware that this is the point, right? Where I'm going to make a change. Am I going to go left, or am I going to go right? And so, I think it definitely builds that out.
and to me, I never realized that was like, I don't want to say 90%, but that was the battle. To me, the battle was, or the war I wanted to win was, I want to change. I don't want to have negative thoughts, or I don't want to ruminate in bed at night over all the problems that may happen tomorrow. I want to stop doing that.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do, but what you do, what the prize ended up being, just the awareness of recognizing when I'm doing it, because that provides the opportunity to say, I can now, what you just said, now I can choose how I deal with this. That's the reward that and I couldn't see that. I think that reward had been there for a while. I just didn't know what to do with it because I kept implementing the automatic programs, even though I may go, man, I'm ruminating about this. And then I would do it anyway.
Yeah.
And then one day I said, oh, I have an opportunity here to do something different. And yeah, but it's like I didn't even know what I was looking for. Yeah. And I say this all the time. It's because I feel like for me, I don't have anyone to mirror. And that's why, like finding your site, I'm like, here's somebody that I recognize is trying to do things that I'm doing. And maybe this is going to help, because you don't know. It's like people used to say, well, you just need a role model. And I'm like, well, I don't know a middle-aged white dude that quit his job that stays home with his kids. I don't know anybody that does that. So I can't mirror them. I can't, because it's so uncommon. But yeah, I don't know what my point was there, but
it's all right. I know. Let's say it's even like when I look at it, right? It's like, when you're raised up, right? Essentially, like it's that fear, right? Like we're trained to like fear things, right? And I think that like it's embedded in us, so we don't give a lot of things a second thought, right? It's more like, okay, well, I know I'm going to get something's going to happen, something bad here is going to happen, whether that's someone's going to judge me for my actions, or if I do this, I'll have my family will tell me that's not what you should be doing. And I think a lot of times it's all fear related, and trying to again uncover that and expand that comfort zone. Okay, I'm okay with essentially self first, right? Like I'm going to make the choices for myself and start pushing that out even further and doing what you want to do. And I think that's one of the greatest things that help you ignite change is once you come to that realization that you don't have to follow blindly, right? And deep thought essentially on what you want, because I think a lot of people just don't know what they want either. And
well, yeah, they've never thought about it. I mean, that's the problem with being spoon-fed a dream. You never actually took the time to think about whether that was something that you wanted. And I think and I think I would have to believe that it's kind of common in middle age to do this, right? Because before you're 5 years. Well, I mean, yeah, it's like here's how I see it. And you said fear, so don't want to forget that, because I agree. I think all of this, or a lot of this, is motivated by fear, and it's interesting again to use my wife as an example, because I am watching her go through it, and so it's easy for me to say, "Oh, she's doing this thing that I did, and I learned about." You know what I mean? And a big thing for her is the fear of the unknown, and so she has to control it, and she feels safe when she has money, and so So it's really hard for her to dissociate from her career, because the whole reason she built the career is to have enough money to feel safe. So when she removes that, she doesn't feel safe anymore. And then it's like, you said, then we don't know what to do. So we fall, but I think so, because I have a 4-year-old, and it's interesting to think that she doesn't even have free will. And I think about what she's learned from the world, not just things I've taught her, because she could talk and walk and go to the bathroom, and she laughs at stuff. And, she has had no choice about whether she likes this cartoon or that cartoon. She just is either been convinced by us, or maybe she's developed some of this on her own because she is her own person. But all like religion, race relations, money, all these things we learn, we're taught, whatever, before we're even aware that we're being taught. And so it only makes sense that at some point in your life, you may go, why am I Christian?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just because mom and dad were. Oh, so at some point, yeah, I guess you question these things or you don't.
Yeah.
but for me, it's sort of like this. I've always been like this. I mean, since as long as I can remember. But now it's sort of like what you said, like about your dad. I've only got so much time left. I'm aware of that now. I don't feel immortal anymore, and so now it's important to maybe figure some of these things out, or try to before I die.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think this is a question I've kind of come up with, or a question that was asked to me was, do you ever get to a point where you're like, do you think you'll be like satisfied, right? Like, say you branch out and stuff like that, and you start doing these things on your own, you start trying to ignite change. Do you get to a point where you're like satisfied? Like, what is that point where you feel like you're satisfied with essentially like the way you've lived your life, right? Like, can you reflect back in your life 40 more years from now and say you enjoy it?
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, it's funny. So I'm my podcast, I'm almost to episode 50, and I'm using arbitrarily 50 as a pivot point where I'm going to say, okay, I've laid all these things out. Now I'm going to try to make sense of them and sort of organize them. And that's one of the things that I think about is sort of the idea that do we have to suffer? Are we always going to be disappointed? What's the goal? Like, what's the goal? Mm-hmm. Is my goal to be satisfied? Is my goal to be content? Is my goal to not suffer anymore? And I don't think that's it. I think it's flow. I want to spend as much time as I can in my life in that state of joy or flow or contentment, not restlessness and, not anger and not feeling out like I'm missing out on something. And yeah, it's a good question as to whether that ever goes away or if that really is like the human state that you're supposed to be in. And I don't believe that it is, because I feel like other people, I always refer to it as enlightenment, knowing full well that that's a bloated word and everybody defines it differently, but I just want to be on the path. And it's funny because when I got divorced, right, and, people could take it both ways. My wife, had an affair and she's now married to the other man and it's all good. But for a while there, I was angry at her and I wanted to tell everybody in the world that she's an adulteress and, whatever, and just sort of do that thing that I think people do when they get mad at each other when there's a breakup. And I, and she wasn't bad at me, but she wasn't really perfect. But I had this vision of, or I used to say, I hate the high road. It's so lonely on the high road. I know that I need to keep my mouth shut and be on the high road about this and just do it for the kids and make it work and not be an asshole and make it equitable and fair and stay on the high road. And the only benefit I could ever find of being on the high road is knowing that I wasn't on the low road. And in the end, that was enough. There was nobody patting me on the back telling me, oh, you're such a big man or whatever for not doing all these things. The only recognition was just to know that I wasn't down there, because I really didn't. If I was on the low road looking up, I would have had this bad feeling. And I think that's sort of the answer to that question for me is, how do you minimize that bad feeling of just being comfortable and knowing you're in the right place or on the right path? And so that's how I envision it is, I'll stay on this path of trying to seek enlightenment or live a better life or whatever until I think it's stupid or decide that this is a dumb thing, or maybe, then I'll get into racing motorcycles. I can't say. You can't know the future. But it's kind of like mandolin. I played mandolin. I played music since I was a kid, and I played mandolin probably for like 30 years now. And I used to struggle with wanting to be better, but not spending the time to do it. It's like anything. Take anything. It's like working out, running, dieting. I wanted this thing, but I wasn't willing to put in the time to do it. And I would pick it up and put it down. Sometimes I wouldn't play it for a year, and sometimes I would play it all the time. But overall, my relationship with the mandolin was one of struggle, because I would always think about it. And somewhere along the line, some older person wiser than me just said, well, dude, it's obviously important to you. You've been doing it for 15 years, right? Yeah. So why are you so uptight about the degree to which, or the quality of how you're doing it? Can't you just recognize that it's an important thing to you, and that's good? And then so 10 years of thinking about it like that, I finally got to a place where I honestly don't care how good I am. I don't care where it goes in the future. I don't care what I've done in the past. I just know that I feel so good that I can reach over and pick this thing up and make it play music and feel good. And that sounds corny and like, I don't know, even to say that out loud, I'm not looking for any recognition. It's just the truth. And so I've figured out how to make, you know what I mean? So something about that process has narrowed it down to like the simplest thing. And somehow I think that mirrors an answer to your question. You know, that's how I know I've made it with mandolin. We're cool. We're good.
Well, that's the thing too, is I think like you're talking about that, right? Is like, I think a lot of times we don't do specific things because we don't want to be seen in a light. And this is something I've seen with other people, right? I'll get compliments like, you're just who you are, Marcus, like, right? Like, I don't like have any kind of filter. And I think a lot of times it's taken me a while to get to that point. And I think a lot of times we present ourselves in a way that we want people to see. And I see this just being observant of a lot of people, right?
Dude.
And it's trying to break away from that and just being okay with like, I don't know if this, like you said, comes with age, where you're like, you know what, I just don't care anymore, right? Like I'm going to be happy, right? I'm going to enjoy the things that I enjoy. Well, maybe one day I'll like the mandolin, maybe one day I won't.
Right. And that's getting at that authenticity thing. So I think inherent to, if I can go back and like change my answer, I want to add that to it too, because that is part of the definition of that path, is to let go of, because man, I'm a mask wearer, you know. I mean, I part of my problem, if you will, has always been that I'm a people pleaser. And so what I do is I put on whatever mask I think a person wants me to wear to minimize conflict and to make them happy and to have them love me, or what, you know, that's sort of has been my MO. So not doing that is a process of exactly what you said, of being more authentic, letting them see the real me. And again, like you said before, if they decide they can't handle it or don't want it anymore, then I have to be cool with that. And all of that is motivated by fear, right? I'm afraid they're going to make fun of me, not love me, abandon me. Yeah. And so that's how all of that. And so part of that path is inherent, you know, what are your personal things that you want to shed, you know, or improve upon? And I think you get happier the more you do that. And the interesting question is, do I ever really become not a people pleaser? Or is that always going to be some element of who I am that I have to be aware of and sort of manage, that I could easily, it's like, I just quit nicotine gum. I'm like a couple weeks, nicotine free. And I chewed nicotine gum for like 20 years. I mean, as long as it's, dude, I mean, I've had a relationship with nicotine since I was 15 years old. And there's moments upwards of a year where I didn't have any nicotine, but this time I want to do it for good. And I really look at this as, I wonder, am I always going to be, it's like an alcoholic or somebody who's addicted to drugs. Are you always going to have that? I feel like right now, I'm always going to have this nicotine thing. I'm always going to be, you know, if I'm 80 years old and somebody hands me a cigar and I smoke it, I'm going to go right out and buy a pack of cigarettes, you know, because I'm a nicotine addict. But I don't know if it's like that with trauma or personality traits, you know. So it's hard to say what the future brings as far as contentment and whether or not you're really ever happy or finished. With your work, your life's work.
I don't think we'll ever finish, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, and that's what makes it exciting. Yeah, not to. This is a good story, I think. Hopefully, your listeners will appreciate it. But I got a chance to interview Bela Fleck, who's a banjo player extraordinaire. You know, top 5. If anybody ever mentions the word banjo, he's going to come up. And I interviewed him on the phone, and we were talking about music in general. And he had just gotten a deal with Sony Music, coming up from sort of a world where he probably struggled to make ends meet. You know, he was playing 300 days a year, from a genre of music that just wasn't very popular, and he wasn't making a lot of money. So this deal with Sony meant he had sort of arrived and made it, and now he has a contract for the future. He can kind of breathe a little bit. And so I was asking him, now that you've made it, is that going to change the future? And it's funny because he just started laughing, and I was like, what did I say? And he's like, I don't look at it like that. I get up every day wanting to be a better banjo player. I'm in love with this instrument. I know I'm on a path for the rest of my life. The relationship with this thing is going to develop. Yeah, now I have a little bit more peace of mind that's more likely, but I'm never going to stop chasing and wanting to get better. He's like, think about it. If I just decided today that I'm done and I'm good, I'm not going to want to play banjo anymore. So he was talking about that sort of lifelong motivation as being the thing that mattered the most, right? All the other stuff was just sort of noise in the background, and that some musicians are just that, and I guess this applies to life, that passionate about the path, and hopefully you never fall off of it. And maybe one day he decides he's done. He gets on something else. He's into making the perfect bacon or whatever.
Yeah, most definitely.
But yeah, something about him saying that, just like it was a real moment for me of going, oh yeah, okay, that's part of it is passion.
Yeah.
And that sort of solves a lot of problems. If you can maintain that, it takes care of itself. Maybe.
No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, anytime you lose passion, right, for something specific about getting better at something, which I think a lot of people struggle with, trying to find passion in itself, right? But yeah, I think once you get tired of just trying to better your craft, right, I think is a good way of explaining it, right?
Well, and for me, music makes sense because I do it, even though I would, amateur, hobbyist, whatever. It's not my life, but it's a thing that you do, and you can achieve, a pretty high level, and then there's all kinds of levels in the middle.
Yeah.
I don't know, and I think it's a good metaphor for anything. But it's interesting that you say that not everybody has passion. I wonder if that's true, because I think a lot about the difference between, like the first bifurcation of my thought process is that, who am I, or what's all this about, or whatever. Mm-hmm. I guess some people don't do that. And so I'm trying to just be aware that maybe some people just don't care. But what I've been asking everybody I run into lately, and I'll ask you, do you struggle with the person that you are and the person that you feel like you are supposed to be, or that you should be?
Do I struggle with the person I am? I think.
Or did you used to? Maybe not so much anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I think a lot of people are. That's a perfect question, because I think at a younger age, I did struggle with that. Right, like I used to get bullied a lot, and I used to be the chunky kid, right? And I used to be really nerdy. I still am really nerdy, but now I'm okay with that, right? Like I really don't care. Like that's just part of who I am. And realizing at the point now where I'm at, like I'm comfortable with myself. Are there things I want to correct with myself? Yeah, there's always something I want to correct, and always trying to get better, right? Like I always want to. I think now in my life, I'm at that point where it's like, what is my potential? Like I've seen where I've come from, like how much further can I really go? And it really goes back to how much further am I going to push, right? And I think it's that initial push, like what you're saying, when you're igniting this change in your life, right? Like you have that initial push, like how much further will you push it to see how much further you'll grow? And I mean, the possibility, you hear that whole thing about, the possibilities are endless and all these things. And you're like, yeah, right, whatever. It's not going to happen. But, right, if you really pushed yourself, right, like you use the tools and stuff we talk about and stuff like that, being aware of what's going on and making the choices that align with that, you kind of realize that, hey, you know what? Like, how far can I really go? Like, what kind of potential do I have in myself? And I'm at that point where I'm comfortable with who I am and everything, but I want to see what more, like, right? It's like trying to squeeze out as much as you can out of that lemon, see what's left in there, right? And maybe there's a whole other lemon or a couple lemons, right? Like, I don't know, but I want to see what the potential is.
Oh, that's awesome. Because I mean, that's kind of, I've been struggling a lot with this idea of abundance versus scarcity. And what you're describing, is just this belief that there's infinite possibility, right? So to speak, or that maybe it's finite, but you don't know. And yeah, so I get stuck on that. Like in real estate, I took a short course on sort of how to invest in real estate for passive income. And the first thing that we did was set up like a why, like, why are you doing this and what's your goal? And the teachers encouraged us to just make goals like, I want to generate $1 million a year in passive income, free money every year. Like that should be your goal. And I was just like, that's no. Why would you set a goal that? Because I know how hard all that means. What it takes is a lot of work. And that's when I sort of realized that I have a thing. I have some limiting beliefs, about abundance. Whereas the rest of the class was like, yeah, I want to be rich. And I struggle with that. And I'm starting to make peace with it. And it's exactly what you said. It's how far do I want to go? Because there's nothing stopping me. Like that voice, the roommate doesn't show up to talk you out of it.
It's like having that governor on your life, right? Like you need to take it off and kind of let yourself be and see what's possible.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I think, because I'm such a mathematical nerd, I see like like knowledge plus experience equals wisdom. I mean, I think like that. And I see this relationship between passion and growth. And I think, what's going to limit your growth potential is probably just your passion. At some point, you may start to lose interest. Like, okay, I don't need to be bigger, or, I don't need to be able to live on less sleep, or I don't need to make more money. I start to lose passion for it. And so that's really what defines your limits more than, and that's perfect because you don't want to do it anymore. So you stop doing it. There's no reason. And right when you were saying that, I sort of envisioned this, two-dimensional graph where like time and passion, I guess there's 3 variables, like growth and time.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I see it as math, but I can't explain it. Because I've been thinking this bigger project I'm working on, episode 50 through, they talk a lot about the Facebook algorithm. And, there was a documentary on Netflix about the social network or the social dilemma about the algorithms and that whole idea that if you don't know what the product is, it's you. And how the internet is sort of now designed these algorithms to capture your attention, and they've translated that to dollars. And so my question was, can this personal growth thing that the things that we're generally talking about now, can they be kind of reduced to a model that describes these things? And is that helpful? I think, yes, they probably can be, but the second part, I'm not so sure people care to see these things presented like that. But in my mind, I appreciate.
Yeah, I think that's what it is right. Like, it's like having the framework. I think a person wants to change, right? And I think a lot of times that people don't really understand that they want to change and what it takes. And I think a lot of times what it is, it's more like, well, what can I just do to satisfy myself right now? As opposed to, okay, well, if I can make this a lifelong change and make things better each and every day. It's not saying every day is going to be perfect, but things can be better by doing and utilizing these things and having that framework like you're talking about. And again, using what works, what doesn't. Again, passion changes as you get older, right? And you find new things, new perspectives. Your passion changes, but it's just like you're saying, like you stated before, like I think it is like that state, being in that state and maintaining that state. And that's where you really find your motivation and your passion and all these other different things. That Zen-like feeling, right, is being in that state.
When I look back on my life, and I think I've probably done this in therapy, when people ask you to sort of, tell me about a time when you were really happy, and I think about every one of them is when I was in flow, when I was in a state of flow where the time, just like you said, time changes and you forget that you're doing work and you look at the clock and you're like, oh crap. I can think about all the time. And so to me, I just wonder, like, what if I spent more time like that
Yeah.
and still got all my stuff done? Because this is the part that really gets me. I'm really concerned, and I admire you for being sort of past this. I'm still sort of restricted by what people think of me to a certain degree. And what the big part of that is, I don't want to be seen as selfish. And this is a lot to do with that people pleasing thing that I still struggle with, and really like with my family. So I come at this whole thing with, okay, I have a set of deals I've made that I don't want to renege on. Like, I've made some agreements with my wife and my kids, and maybe to a certain degree to my parents, but not so much. Maybe my friends. And I've sort of said I'm going to show up and, take the trash out, or drive you to school, or, give you advice, or whatever. And so, and the money would go in this pot too, right? I've agreed to have a job that pays the bills so that we can live. That's not my thing, but other people. And so, you got to kind of meet these core duties. And then what I would like to see in the world is for that to count as permission to do the things that we're talking about, so that I don't have to feel selfish. You see, to see the thing, because I feel like I've got to meet other people's needs, these needs first, in order to have the permission, so that I'm not viewed as selfish. Now, if you could take out the who gives a crap if anybody sees me as being selfish out of that, then none of that is necessary. But at some point, it still kind of is, because I don't want to become. I am afraid that part of this for me would be that I'd get so into myself that it would start to affect my relationships with people. Now, I don't know that that's a thing, or that other people do that, or that ever even is real, but it's a fear I still have that I don't know what to do with. It's like a wall I'm up against. Do you ever have that sort of, like, how does self-help and selfishness?
Well, I've always said, like, I think, like, you're the base, you're the foundation in which everything stands, right? So, like, if you aren't, I understand where you're coming from. Like, there's specific things that you are essentially responsible for, right? And so ultimately, I think what matters is making yourself comes first, whether that's meditation, exercise, and stuff like that, the things that help build that foundation, right? Because I think if you're weak, again, that's going to bleed over into all other things. So even though, you may be on your, trying to help your kids or your wife doing something, and perhaps one day you have a stroke because you neglected these things, right?
Yeah,
and then at that point, then you realize self first, right? Then you realize, okay, well, now I need to start taking care of myself first. And I think we tend to forget we need to maintain ourselves, right, physically and mentally, to be able to withstand all these other things, so we can help support the ones that we love and care about and provide, right? And so I think, there's a balance there, but I think there should be a priority over specific things that help build that foundation in yourself, and make sure that those are taken care of daily as well. So that you can provide for your family. Because even like your kids, right? Your kids are going to eventually get old. They're going to be adults, right? They're not going to be there for you anymore at some point, right? And so I think a lot of times we see them young, and we think they're going to be young forever. And then when they turn 18 and they move out, right? Like, they don't care, really. They're doing their own thing, right? And so that's something I think, as an adult, as a parent, right? My kids are still small, but I see this all the time, that you have to remember that eventually they're going to become adults, and they're going to move away, and then it's going to be on you. And if you don't maintain yourself and self first, right? It's
no, that's, man, I didn't come, like, this is really just hanging out, but I feel like that's like therapy for me to hear that, because it makes so much sense. And I know it's the airplane, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. And I know that, but it really helps to be reminded and to hear it from somebody that practices it and understands it, because it's like mirroring again. It gives me a reference point to say, I'm not being selfish. I am, because, I think the scenario in my mind that I envision is that I'm going to, like, I don't know, disappear off of the earth. Like, when I'm still, that there's not even, it's not a realistic, it's an irrational belief, right? That I would do this. It's just, but it's the old stuff that I'm still working on. which made me think of this other guy that I interviewed who literally did that. He, I don't know if you noticed the Bernhard Kutzler. He's an Austrian dude, and he disappeared for 3.5 years.
Oh.
And he told his son, I may never see you again. I have to go do this thing. And he went off and isolated himself with no electricity, no nothing for 3.5 years so he could figure out his meaning of life story. And, and so that it's like, God, that's so selfish on the one, this part of me would say that's so selfish, but at the same time, that's your thing. I mean, and it's funny with the family thing, because family is a value to me. It's not to everybody. And I've wanted to really understand this from all sides. Like I did with my divorce. I got divorced. It was pretty obvious to say, well, it's my wife's fault. But through therapy and understanding, I learned that I really need to figure out what I did. And it was all this people pleasing stuff. But so to understand the whole thing, not just to pick one explanation and like ignore a chance for me to grow and to learn about myself. And so this what was I talking? This idea that I had something to learn about. Dang it, what was I talking about before the divorce? Bernhard Kutzler and disappearing, and that at the end of my life, you alluded to this earlier, like on our deathbed, will we look back and have regrets, or like be happy with what we did, or like did we push that enough? And have these kind of thoughts. I use death as an advisor a lot to sort of think, where will I be and how will I feel about this when I'm dying? But sometimes I think maybe putting time and effort into family and having that as a big value is not the right thing to do, right? Maybe that actually does take too much attention away from my capacity to become whatever it is I need to become, right? So I'm definitely willing to sort of consider that it's part of the whole puzzle. Just because I do this one thing doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that.
Well, I think we have to consider all sides. I think.
Yeah, most definitely.
For doing it right.
But we are coming up in the hour mark, and I wanted to ask you one last question before we get going. Is what would you like people to take away from this interview?
Well, I mean, many things.
Yeah.
One thing I would really like to see more of this, like what we're doing. Two dudes, and I know you do a lot of this, and I try to do a lot of this, talking about things that are meaningful. I've always fantasized about, and maybe this wasn't even a real thing, like the old Scottish pubs when like the village, men, women, all ages and colors, and would get together at this public house and have a couple of ales and talk about stuff that was meaningful. I would love to see that become, a regular part of the world. And maybe it already is, and I'm just oblivious to it. So I would like to see people sort of think that this is normal, like normalizing having conversations about topics like what we're talking about. That would be a cool take-home message, and have that sort of perpetuate out in the world more frequently.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
Now where can people meet you at, Chris? Where can they find you?
Well, the easiest place is www.chrisburcher.com, which is CHRASBURCHER. That's my home base, and everything is there. And then knowledge plus experience equals wisdom with the mathematical signs is my sort of podcast and YouTube and blog. So you can find that on YouTube and all the social media, and all the podcast providers have the podcast. But it's probably easiest to start from my homepage. Just the way SEO works. I haven't figured out how to get the knowledge plus experience equals wisdom to show up everywhere, but my name does. if that makes sense.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Chris. I appreciate everybody listening. And until next time, I will see you guys later.
See you guys.